Hey, it's 420 Live, and we have our co-host today, as usual, Rick Thompson and Jamie Cooper. And we have a very special guest, Andrew Brisbo, who is the director of the Marijuana Regulatory Association. We're looking forward to talking to him. I know he has this big quarterly Zoom meeting on Thursday. Maybe we can get some secret beforehand tips on what might be said there. But let's start off with Rick Thompson. Go ahead, take it away with the news, Rick.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to the Cannabis News with Rick Thompson on 420 Post. Let's begin. Well, it's been tough to follow the bouncing ball of High Times Magazine's efforts to get into the business of selling cannabis. We've seen efforts to purchase dispensary chains in other states fizzle out, but the company seems to have a strong connection to Red, White, and Bloom, the parent company of retailer Pharmaco in Michigan. They announced in October they were going to rebrand their stores as High Times stores. Well, there's no word on how that rollout's going, but the two companies did announce the launch of a High Times branded cannabis product line. They'll be available through the Pharmaco stores and come in many varieties of cannabis formulations, including a top shelf High Times Red and a presumably lesser in some way High Times Black. But they'll be out sometimes in mid-2022, but again, available only through their own stores. Another bouncing ball to watch and laugh at, the City of Warren's efforts to accommodate cannabis businesses. Now, City Council approved businesses in a process which violated the Open Meetings Act. The mayor wants to do his own thing. Industry says they were promised things that didn't happen. What a mess! A Macomb County judge ruled against Warren in a lawsuit filed by aggrieved parties. Mayor Fouts says settling that lawsuit could bankrupt the city. Businesses want 28 dispensary locations, but the city wants only 15. A settlement agreement was entered into, which would drop the financial burden and grant those 28 licenses. City Council rejected that proposal because they think they can win in court. Fouts then vetoed Council's no vote on advice of the city attorney. Council got their own lawyer who says the mayor can't override the veto. Now, this battle of dueling attorneys continues, but the cannabis industry is made to wait. Cannabis users get more and more used to purchasing from retail centers outside of the city. Unfortunately, it seems there will be more news and no resolution coming out of Warren on the subject in the near future. The U.S. House of Representatives passed the MORE Act, which would completely deschedule cannabis on a federal basis. The vote is historic. It's the first time legislators have agreed cannabis does not belong on the schedule of controlled substances. The MORE Act would expunge cannabis crimes federally, would create cause to release federal cannabis prisoners as well. But just like anything good, there's a darker side to the proposal, too. The language of the act itself is highly problematic. It would require a federal cannabis tax of 5 to 8%, require all distributors of cannabis to receive federal licensing, and bans anyone from owning a cannabis business federally if they've been investigated for cannabis crimes. That's a lot of us. Regardless of how we feel about the language, the bill is unlikely to be taken up in Senate committee hearings during these very few remaining days of 2020's legislative calendar. And final story. One of the unexpected things that happened as a result of COVID-19 is the National Basketball Association suspended random testing for cannabis during the heavily altered 2020 to 2021 basketball season.
All right, Jamie or Rick, I've never met Andrew before. You both know him much better than I then. So why don't you go ahead and introduce him and we'll get started.
Well, I'll be happy to do this. Director Brisbo's been the director of the Marijuana Regulatory Agency since its conception, but even before that, he was in charge of the marijuana program when it was still under the umbrella group of the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. In addition to that, he's taken national prominence by taking a position with the Cannabis Regulators Association, which is a national group of people like himself that manage cannabis programs on a statewide level. The goal there is obviously to information share best solutions practices, and to guide the nation into a better situation for cannabis law reform. Welcome to 420 Post, Director Brisbo.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks, Mike. Jamie, always good to see you. Stephen, appreciate being on with you to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the MRA. I'm not sure I have anything quite as exciting as Rick did there. We try not to make headlines somewhat deliberately. But we do have, you mentioned it, Mike, we have our public meeting coming up Thursday. That's an opportunity for us to provide kind of a generalized update of what's happening in the MRA in all facets of our program, as well as to hear any concerns from the public So it's a great chance for anybody who wants to speak directly to the leadership of the agency, have their concerns aired in a public format. We like to hear from people, and we're doing those still on Zoom now. Obviously, during the pandemic, we switched to almost complete virtual operations at the MRA, but we do still open that door so people can come express any concerns or let us know what they want to say. It's been a very interesting year in this space, managing the marijuana regulatory agency. We've seen, as somewhat predicted, a decline in the number of registered patients in the state. I think when legalization occurred in 2018, we foresaw that coming. We were up to almost 300,000 patients a couple of years ago, but we seem to have leveled off now to just over 240,000. It was coming down pretty precipitously every month, and now we actually went up last month from 241,000 back up to 242,000. So I'm not sure exactly where we'll settle in, but that's an interesting number and a little bit higher than I think a lot of us predicted that it would kind of settle in. So maybe we'll see that continue to decline, but I think that's largely going to be dependent on participation in the adult use market and the availability of retail operations and the communities shifting from prohibition to allowing some of those facilities to crop up. I think the big story this year in terms of what we've managed as an agency has been the issuance of licenses and the growth of the industry itself. So we have over, we'll pull up the right numbers here. We're up now over 750 medical licenses and we're up to 473 adult use licenses.
Wow.
So, we continue to plow away at issuing those applications. We have not seen the number of medical applications in the commercial space diminish like we thought it might. But with the policy decision that we made earlier and announced that beginning March 1st of next year, we're rescinding the requirement to have a license under the MMFLA in order to qualify for most of the licenses under the MRTMA. I think we might start to see a shift in how businesses are structuring and how they're applying for licenses. And we're anticipating, moving ahead and seeing a lot more investment in the adult use space, obviously, where the market base is so much broader. But we do still have 240,000 patients in the state that have those registry cards. So we need to make sure we still have licenses in the medical space as well. And as many of you know, we've been working on some potential policy shifts as we look at where the market is heading, trying to align policy with that kind of inevitable shift in the commercial space into the adult use market. So that's something that we thought might happen this year, but we'll take up next legislative session and continue to look at those ideas and figure out the best way to position the state to best serve the needs of the consumers, both adult use consumers and patients, and create the best environment for businesses to be successful. And speaking of business growth, that's really been the story to me over the last year, is looking at what's been happening within the market in terms of the sales and the supply. So if we go back to November of 2019, that was the last month where we had a medical-only commercial market. There's about $26 million in sales that month. We jump ahead 4 months to March of this year. That was obviously the month that the pandemic hit and became sort of controlling all of our lives. We were at $52 million in sales. It was hard to predict what was going to happen when the pandemic hit. We made some shifts trying to provide some guidance to industry as to how to operate safely. Commercial businesses were allowed to stay open in this space to serve the needs of the patients and the consumers. And as it turns out, cannabis seemed to be in vogue for those that were stuck at home with a little more disposable income when they couldn't go out and do other recreational activities. So we saw another doubling of sales between March and July. We were up to $109 million in sales in July. And now we've kind of leveled off. We are seeing sales in the adult use market now surpassing the medical market, which is predicted, but that happened relatively quickly. The amount of the way the industry shifted so quickly to provide access in the adult use space was quite impressive. And you could tell everyone had been kind of planning ahead and charting the course of their business based on that shift into the adult use market and to be prepared to take advantage of that. But you can't have sales without supply. So one other thing that we were tracking is what does production growth look like in the adult use market, particularly now that we phased out what we call external transfers. So we had been allowing for some product produced outside the regulated market by caregivers to come in through the medical commercial market. And that was phased out on October 1st of this year. And it was a sort of a pleasant surprise that announcing that decision well in advance really seemed to spur some investment and growth in the supply side of the commercial industry, such that if we look back at October of last year, there were 85,000 plants being grown in the regulated space. In March, we were up to 197,000. In August, it was all the way up to 397,000. And now we've settled in well over 400,000. And depending on a snapshot in time, we have over 450,000 plants that are being grown by regulated growers in the state. So, we need that investment in the supply side in order to ensure market stability. We're starting to see prices come down as well. Now that we have more competition in the market and more participation in the supply side, it's starting to bring prices down, which ultimately is good for consumers. And I think that's only going to be bolstered as we start to see more and more municipalities start to participate. Obviously, the city of Detroit was a headline moving forward with an ordinance to allow for adult use facilities. So that's the biggest municipality in the state moving ahead. We do still have some drier areas of the state where there's not a tremendous amount of access, but every week we see a couple more municipalities shifting from the opt-out to the opt-in. Ultimately, our goal as an agency is to create an environment that provides the safest possible access. And so we are proponents of, consumers having access to the regulated market. In the end, I say this all the time, that the legalization, either medically or for recreational purposes in the state, did not create a cannabis market. The cannabis market was there and thriving. We're just trying to put some regulatory boundaries around that so we can ensure safe consumer access. I think we're making tremendous strides there. And as Rick alluded to, we're looking at policy both at the state level and the federal level. Our organization that the state of Michigan was one of the founding members of, the Cannabis Regulators Association, or CANRA, is really focused on best practices. When I first took this job, we had to reach out to other state operators who had been in this space and really ask questions. We had to have open discussions with industry to figure out, where the issues were, what we could do as an agency to support business growth while still ensuring the safety of consumers. And it was sort of a patchwork. And I had to make calls to Jim Burak in Colorado, Rick Garza in Washington, and Steve Marks in Oregon, and just one-off ask questions and make those connections. Now having an established association allows us, as we see more and more states coming online, and what do we have, 4 or 5 just in November that adopted ballot initiatives or laws that will allow for regulated use. That they need those resources, because this is unlike anything else, and it's brand new to everyone. There really isn't anyone to lean on within individualized states for expertise, because no one's done this before. So now we have resources to make available. We can talk other state operations through the hurdles that we went through. And from my personal experience, one of the greatest pieces of that was to look at everything that had happened in Colorado and Washington and California and Oregon and Alaska and learn from that, but also see what they're going through today, because that's what's coming to us. And that allowed us to be a little more forward thinking, to get out ahead of things like delivery services, for example, designated consumption establishments. Why wait until that's at your doorstep or people are trying to push those boundaries? Let's just set the parameters and say, we know what's going to happen, so let's figure out the best way to go about it. So we tried to be at the forefront of those issues. And I'm really excited to be a part of an organization like CANRA, where we can have a positive influence on how this rolls out nationally. And then when we look at the national policy landscape, I don't know what's right or wrong. There have been a lot of ideas floated around as to how, federal legalization, decriminalization, rescheduling, descheduling, how all that works. And the attorneys will have a field day trying to figure out what the idiosyncrasies mean. But we need to know what's happening. And we need to have a seat at the table as regulators to say, we've made progress in states. We know some of the mistakes we've made, and we know we've had successes. So let's not recreate new problems. Let's move ahead in a productive way and figure out how things are working in states and not upset the apple cart. We've always implemented things in Michigan with an eye toward, national legalization and trying to figure out how businesses can best be positioned to operate under standards that we think are coming anyway. So we don't have to see our businesses retool and put a lot of investment into adopting new standards that they weren't prepared for. So I think it's important that we have a seat at that table, that those conversations are held in the light of day, and that we can help everyone understand what's happened in states and how national policy can be supportive of the existing industry and not cause it to have to tear down just to build back up. So, a lot more to come. I think the conversation is going to continue to advance. We've always known we've been on this sort of inevitable push toward a more federalized approach to cannabis. And under that umbrella of cannabis, we also talk a lot about the intersections with hemp and marijuana as well, because we have one plant here that now is regulated 2 very different ways with a lot of different stakeholders at the table. So what I see is, as regulations and approaches in states start to differentiate more and more between hemp and marijuana, everything practically speaking is moving closer together. So I think I might be a little bit of an outlier with some of my counterparts at looking at sort of whole plant regulation, really thinking through cannabis as a whole and not thinking through hemp versus marijuana. Particularly when we talk about safety standards, whether it's a CBD product or a THC product, we want consumers to have confidence that they know that someone is at the helm making sure that those products are as safe as possible. So a lot more work to be done. It's certainly an exciting time to be working in cannabis, if you will, even though I'm just a government guy. But yes, it's a lot more fun than doing other licensing and regulation. So I'm happy to be a part of it and excited to see what happens nationally, and excited to play a small role in continuing to position Michigan as a leader in this space.
I'm sure there are questions from Rick, Jamie, and Steve, so fire away.
Well, Director, I've got a question. CANRA, one of the concerns that we've had is some of the dialogue coming out of the press releases regarding CANRA's launch was that they wanted to standardize some of the laws between different states across the United States. And in our consumer opinions, we have the best laws in the United States. Standardizing laws may mean trying to compromise some of the personal freedoms we have in order to equate them with some of the states that have lesser levels of freedoms. Can you assure us that that's probably not going to happen?
I think we look mostly at the commercial processes. That's what myself and my counterparts really regulate. We don't regulate home use and possession. So I think we're really talking about standards for safety for the most part. Looking at we talk about testing standards. One of the biggest challenges we face is, what do you test for? How do you test it? Do you use validated methods, and who's validating the methods? And that there's an absence of that, right? There's not a lot of research in the cannabis space because it's been federally illegal, and the DEA has been very restrictive on how it can be researched. So I think we look at commercial markets and how we regulate that. That's really the focus, not at all focused on personal freedoms. And I think we talk about standardization. It's creating a baseline so that when we see a move toward nationalization of the cannabis market, that we don't have this incredible patchwork where some states are winners and others are losers, and businesses are left on the outside looking in. So I don't think we have any interest in, and we certainly have some differences when we look at what you can do at home and what you can possess. And you're right, Michigan's kind of on the more, I would say, liberal side of what's allowed. But there's been no discussion about restricting that as part of Canada's objectives.
That helps to ease my mind. Another thing I'm concerned with is recently you had a Zoom meeting with the public, and you talked about the potential to perhaps limit production of cannabis in the future so as we don't end up with a quote-unquote Oregon-style mess. Can you describe how you would potentially regulate cannabis in the future so we don't end up with an Oregon-style mess?
Well, first of all, let me make sure those are your words. Don't tell Steve Marks in Oregon I called it an Oregon-style mess. Never forget me.
Truth. That's me.
I can tell you, they view it as an opportunity. They've passed laws now that allow export. They're just waiting for the feds to come on board there. I do think that supply versus demand is a consideration. I don't actually have an opinion on what should be done. We don't have any tools right now to limit participation in the market in the commercial side. That's very deliberate in both the MMFLA and the MRTMA. That control of the number of licenses is something that can be done at the local level, but we are prohibited at the state level. I think it's incumbent upon us as sort of the keepers of the data and those closest to what's happening to raise the question to say, hey, we are getting to a point where there might be enough plants in production to meet what we see in demand on the consumer side. Should we do anything? Should we do nothing? Is it meaningful to those? And just start the conversation. So that's really what I'm focused on. If there's more supply than demand, then you're going to see prices go down. That's good for consumers and bad for businesses, right? If you or I don't even know if you can simplify it to say good or bad, but monitoring the economics of that and understanding what the implications are and being transparent with the information we have, I think helps make the most prudent decisions. And then policymakers can decide if something should be done in order to avoid any potential negative outcomes from that imbalance in supply versus demand.
Steve or Jamie, do you have questions?
Yeah, I've got something here. Andrew, it was a pleasure meeting you here. I wanted to ask you a question. I've had a lot of interest in the area of energy efficiency and sustainability. We know that DTE and consumers, for example, are putting out financial rebates when it comes to LED lighting. But what about being that cannabis is not federally legal? There is not a benefit of getting a rebate or a tax credit when building a solar farm or a natural gas power plant. And these are areas that we're involved in on the commercial industrial side, but also on the cannabis side, to help people be more efficient and also, be able to keep their carbon footprint to a minimum as well. Do you see that there's some discussion, or is there an interest in maybe talking to the people within the government to see if there's any benefits that could be offered for companies that are going in that direction?
Yeah, I think sustainability is one of those topics that is right close to the top of issues that we're looking at. I think it's a challenging problem to solve, and even to identify exactly what needs to be done. But it's something that's on the tips of our tongues, and we need to have those conversations. One of the challenges being in this role is, my expertise is in taking applications, issuing licenses, and ensuring regulatory compliance. So, energy policy is not my bailiwick. But we need to play a role in that. And one of the concerns I would have is if you look at sort of sustainability mandates as part of the regulated environment, that's very challenging. We're talking about businesses that already have a very high threshold to get in. A lot of investment needs to come there. And we don't want to prejudice the environment against smaller businesses, particularly as one of the primary conversations we're having is about equity and inclusion and diversity. So you start making mandates on sustainability, that can be very challenging to adhere to. I do think that's the scheduling of marijuana and it being illegal at the federal level creates an incredible challenge when you look at participating in existing infrastructure. I was on a policy call with some members of Congress and other sort of national leaders and talked a lot about, there's existing infrastructure. I think one of the conversations that needs to be had at the federal level is how we just move cannabis into that existing infrastructure. When you look at some of the policies that are there, they would apply the same way to cannabis as they should to other industries. I think that that's an important piece of it. So when you look at things like energy rebates and standards, if you sort of think about it broadly, a cannabis operation is, quasi-agricultural or industrial. We have a retail component. If you think about it in the broadest sense, a lot of those same tenets should apply. We just need to figure out which ones and how to go about it. And I've never been a big fan of sort of mandating things when, there are tremendous costs involved that get passed along to consumers unless, specifically related to health, safety, and welfare. So environmental consideration certainly is something that in the minds of many is a health, safety, and welfare issue over, less of an acute issue, a more chronic issue. So something we need to look at. But we need to make sure we do things the right way and we're considerate for the impacts on businesses and consumers and do things that are reasonable.
Well, when that discussion does happen, I'd love to have an opportunity to participate if that's possible.
Sure.
Jamie, do you have anything that you'd like to ask the director?
Yeah. Hello, Director Brisbo. It's always great to see you. I'm going to go ahead and ask questions surrounding the municipalities. Was wondering if you could share some data and like opt-ins and how that's working, because it seems to be one of the biggest hurdles that we continue to face is some of these communities opting in. For instance, Monday evening, the city of Ferrisburg had it on their agenda. They had zero discussion about opting out and not even giving a business owner the opportunity to present their case. Could we see any changes in the municipalities having this much control over allowing, them in their communities?
If you're looking for policy changes, I think that's challenging. The will of the legislature in 2016, the will of the people in 2018 was pretty clear that municipalities were playing a role. For better or for worse, they play a role in determining what's happening at the local level. And that's not something I'm advocating for changing, to be honest. I think we do play a role in providing educational assistance and outreach to municipalities. And we've recently become more proactive in that. We issued a municipal guide that sort of puts together all the relevant provisions for local government officials to be aware of when they're considering what to do. We get some of the most basic questions from municipal officials when I hear from them. They don't necessarily, they're not all attorneys. I mean, in many cases, it's small townships. You're talking about people that devote a little bit of time every month and didn't necessarily, weren't excited about getting in the middle of something as contentious as determining ordinances for cannabis businesses. That's not really what they signed up for necessarily. So we can draw their attention to the relevant statutes. let them know where their authority lies, but stop short of sort of giving them legal counsel as to what to do. But another potential output that we're looking at as one of the recommendations through a work group that I put together is being a little more proactive with municipalities, trying to connect them to municipal officials that have been through the process and kind of establish that peer-to-peer relationship about what's gone well and what hasn't. I think the other factor is now we're at a point where there should start being some revenue distribution of the excise tax that's collected, and money talks. So when municipal officials start to see that money actually come in and how much that is, that's probably the most common question I get from municipal officials is, how do we estimate how much money we could get? And I can give them the factors that go into that, but no one's cashing any checks yet. When that starts happening, I think that starts to change the conversation. So we have 152 municipalities that allow medical facilities, 85 that allow adult use. So it's growing, but not by leaps and bounds, just by a little bit at a time. There's 1,773 municipalities in the state. So certainly the level of participation is fairly low.
One of my viewers asked me the question, and I figure you're the perfect person to answer it, is on the medical marijuana cards, when you pay for those, how is that money dispersed back out to the municipalities? I could do it.
So none of that is distributed to municipalities. In the registry program, those costs are set just to offset the cost of administering the program. So
okay.
Able to lower those fees and eliminate a lot of the fees. I think it was about a year and a half ago. We changed the rules and took the fee for a card from $60 every 2 years down to $40, and eliminated the charge for a caregiver background check, and eliminated all the change fees. So we kept reducing those costs, and now we are level set where the money that comes in just offsets those administrative costs of actually processing the applications and issuing the cards.
Okay.
At one point, the marijuana fund, which was created by the overpay of those card fees, that was over $20 million. Do we have any idea what that fund sits at right now?
It's over $30 million actually. So now that we've level set that, there is in the budget boilerplate grant funds that are awarded to counties, typically county health departments, for education about the 2008 Act. That's $3 million a year. So we still do provide that, and that information is all on our website. So you can see those reports on who's requesting the money and what they're using it for, if you're so inclined. But that's the only other output. But that's kind of spending down the balance of that fund, if you will. And then there's been some discussion about utilizing some of the funding there for Clean Slate as well.
Clean Slate being an expungement program.
Correct. Yeah.
Which would directly benefit cannabis patients and users. So that's an advantage.
Right. Yeah.
Any more questions for the director? All right, let me bring in Steve Bratic real quick, because he's going to address one of the issues that was brought up, supply. As you all know, I know you know Steve, he's trying to build Sensi Park in the Fort Custer area. And initially, phase one would be about 700,000 square feet. And one of the things that you brought to my attention, and I must admit, I did, Bob Moore, who does financing through friends of ours that we introduced, I introduced him to Steve. So I wanted to make that clear that that relationship was there. But Steve, one of the things that you guys have decided to do is come up with sort of an end of the year charity, benefit kind of thing. I'll let you describe it in your own words.
Sure. Been working with DB3, which is the owner of Sensi Park. Sensi Park is a 5 million square feet design concept that's going to be in the Battle Creek Fort Custer commercial park. And we're looking at trying to get more interest in the community that's going to be built. The first phase is going to be actually just a little bit over 800,000 square feet, unless we have enough interest. And with that, in speaking with DB3 and ourselves, we're trying to offer some benefits to customers that are wanting to come in and at least gain some interest. So even if there's a letter of interest, as well as a request for, a letter of interest to be signed, there's no commitment behind it, just shows that you have some true interest. DB3 is offering a 10% in the cost per square foot for 2 years, as well as offering a 5% to a charity of your choice. And then Bratic is actually going to do a 10% reduction of fees for any of those tenants that actually solidify signing that agreement and actually moving forward if they choose to use Bratic as somebody who's going to do their build outs as well.
All right, so let's talk about where that's in. I know you originally were going to do that in Muskegon, and you ran into all sorts of environmental issues. You moved it to Fort Custer, and so I know you've got some letters of intent already, some interest. Where does all that stand at this point?
Just trying to solidify getting enough letters of interest so that we can finalize the financing for the project. It's really important for our lenders or the DB3's lenders to have that information in play so that there's enough interest in being able to solidify DB3 getting the money that they need to start breaking ground as soon as the ground thaws after the winter is over.
Yeah, whenever that might be, right? So
April, maybe,
Sure. So Jamie or Rick, do you have any questions for Steve?
Well, of course, we've seen a couple of different industrial complexes try to spring up across the state. A big one in Warren also seems to be sort of in limbo based on their municipal hangups. Steve, based on the local community, are you feeling confident about the authorization you have from your local civic leaders?
Yes, we've had discussions with them. We've got unlimited licenses on this property. It's going to be 100 acres. The nice part of it is there's a lot of energy efficiency and sustainability to it as well. Bratic's going to be installing a natural gas power plant, excuse me, and as a benefit to that, part of the lease, it's going to include free electricity, which is, essentially your biggest overhead cost. In addition to the lease, it's going to be, it's also going to include free external or exterior security. So because the property needs to be fenced in and it needs to be monitored, so it's going to have that as a benefit as well. There's a lot of other companies that are out there trying to do things in their own way, but they're using existing buildings for the most part, at least what I've seen. And you have to worry about a lot of other variables. Have they tested their property? Are you going to have any local environmental issues from your neighbors and so on? Where this is going to be a nice, clean property. It's already been tested. We know that we're not going to have any issues from our neighbors. We're right behind the VA hospital and as well as practically right next door to the base, the military base that's there as well. So we feel confident that we're going to have we've got a nice property, not like what would happen in Muskegon.
Director Brisbo, we hear an awful lot of concern about noise pollution, about smell pollution and things like that from cultivation facilities and other industrial complexes within our industry. Has the Marijuana Regulatory Agency fielded many of those complaints?
We've had a few of the odor complaints. We don't currently have any regulations surrounding that. It's been a part of discussions, but ultimately we didn't have any concrete information to say this should be the regulation because this will fix the issue. For the most part, they seem to kind of handle themselves. Our licensees generally try to be good neighbors or are in places where it's not really of concern. But I hear that more from municipal officials who are concerned that citizens are concerned that odor is going to be a problem. But honestly, the vast majority of the issues I've really heard about that are acute related to that are from people growing at home in residential areas where the neighbors are concerned about the smell, not at commercial facilities.
Great.
Okay. Jamie, you have any questions?
Yeah, I want to talk to Steve a little bit about sustainability. I'm just curious because I see that we will continue to move forward to be more of a sustainable energy industry as a whole. But I'm just curious at what kind of changes that some of these facilities that have already built, what kind of changes should they be preparing to make over maybe the next 5 years to be more sustainable?
I think it's really important to really understand, that your competitors, your position in the market. I think that's a great question. At the end of the day, looking at natural gas as one option, maybe doing a microgrid, using whatever space you have available, like your roof, using geothermal, though the solar and geothermal have longer paybacks, but if that's something that is important to you and representing sustainability, it's definitely an advantage if you can use all those variables. I never really want to get into using battery because there's not even a clear understanding of how excuse me, how to recycle a lot of those and/or maintenance at long term. But I think that there's definitely an opportunity to be able to offer a sustainability solution for your own grow facility. But the advantage long term is really significant. So if in fact, let's say you use a natural gas power plant, you can use the waste heat from that equipment to get free heating and cooling and also dehumidification. You can clean the exhaust and get free CO2 for your grow. So those benefits by themselves are money that you're not going to be spending. So that's going to be money in your pocket. So even if you have, let's say, a 3-year payback on a project, and then you're saving money just based on that variable, that becomes pure profit to the bottom line. And now you have the ability to lower your prices to a point, even if you have an interest of lowering it to a point to push out your competition, because you can bring your price down lower than anyone else because you're generating your own power at a cost that you can't buy from the grid. So there's a lot of other benefits long term.
And what does an off-the-grid facility look like?
It really depends on to what magnitude. I mean, if you're going to use geothermal, that's going to be underground. If you're going to use solar, I would definitely put your solar in the location, making sure that you don't have any obstructions like trees or even if it's too low to the ground, that you don't want your building to be able to affect that. But your natural gas, it could be simple as putting it in a shipping container and putting all that equipment on the outside, but we can still aesthetically put up a wall so it's that aesthetically appealing to the community and or to wherever it may be. But yeah, I mean it's very feasible to be able to do all of that, and the pricing of it might be high, but your paybacks are short, at least on the natural gas standpoint. But the long-term benefits, it really shows a huge increase to the value of your property regardless. So if you're looking to either flip and or even stick it out long-term, there's a lot of opportunity to be able to offer more value to your property just because you're now a fully sustainable facility that has the ability to generate your own power. And if you're off the grid completely, we call that island mode. Now you have when the grid goes down, you're still on. Because when's the last time that natural gas went out?
Good point. Director Brisbo, do you have any questions for Steve?
I don't think so. I just like to hear people who are forward thinking and making big plans. That's exciting. We always want to hear about good investment in the state of Michigan.
All right, great. All right, and so we'll give you a chance to provide your contact information at the end of the show, Steve. I kind of want to open it up now to Jamie. Let's talk a little bit about community. I know you got your big event at 6 o'clock tonight. I'll let you do a shameless plug right now.
We do. So we have our weekly virtual networking event every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. Tonight's event's shaping up to be a good one. I think we're all feeling that need for connection while we're all kind of stuck in our homes. So excited to always come together on a weekly basis and be able to connect with those in the industry, and we all help each other. So I actually on our Facebook feed, I will put the link to register for tonight's event. And then also go to sensimag.com/Michigan. We just released our December issue of Sensi magazine. We have a holiday guide in there. So we're featuring some of the cannabis brands and some of the products that they currently have on the market for the holidays. There's some recipes in there for cookies and some, lots of cool lifestyle stuff as well. So thanks, Mike.
Hey, no problem. So I know I should try to participate more in that. I do so many Zoom calls every week that somehow conjuring up the energy to do one more is like, oh, God, but yours are really good. I've enjoyed attending yours, meet some new people.
Well, and I think people don't realize what we do is we bring everybody together and then we force you one-on-one into a room with someone that you may know, or you may not know. So we force you into that conversation, and you'll walk away with a lot of new great connections. So
Okay. I kind of want to open it up now to topics that you all want to talk about. I'm sorry, I lived in Memphis for a while, so that y'all always creeps out from time to time. What are some of the hot topics, and especially since we have Director Brisbo with us today, what would you like to kind of throw out there?
Well, I grew up in Flint, so the y'alls come out of me also too. But Director, can you give us an update on the social equity program? When we look forward to 2021, one of the biggest challenges we faced last year was trying to come up with social equity that actually works for communities. And I know a lot of cities, including the city of Detroit, are struggling with proper ways to make sure that people that were in disaffected communities are included in the industry. What do you see in your crystal ball for the next year regarding social equity?
Well, I formed a work group to specifically focus on issues of equity and diversity and inclusion. I think that group is going to finalize its recommendations within the next couple of weeks, so we may see some progress there. We've had a lot of participation with our social equity program. We expanded it this year to 184 communities, extended and strengthened the fee reductions. And we have dedicated resources that work with applicants to familiarize them with the licensing process and actually provide some, kind of hand-holding to work through that application process as well. But we haven't seen the results we'd hoped for in terms of turning that interest into actual licenses being issued. And when we did a survey and asked what the challenges were for all those applicants that had submitted the social equity application, but not a pre-qualification or licensure application, I want to know what the barriers were. And I think we did this in June. And we had 3 responses that were around the 25% mark. One was the pandemic was putting off their plans, which isn't that surprising. One was they were waiting for their municipality to adopt an authorizing ordinance. So I think there were a lot who were probably focused on the city of Detroit. So now that opportunity exists. And then the third was access to capital. We can get fee reductions all day long and say, instead of giving us $6,000 for a pre-qualification, you only have to give us $1,500. But if you need $500,000 to start up your business, then that $4,500 is not bridging that gap. So one of the things that we've been particularly focused on in the work group is, how do we provide access to capital? You can't go to a bank to get a loan. If you grew up in a disadvantaged community and you were incarcerated for a marijuana-related offense, you might not have resources and connections that can provide you private equity funding to get up to a couple $100,000 to invest in starting a business. So a lot of what we're looking at is, honestly, it's agnostic to cannabis. It's just, where do you get the money and the wherewithal to start a business? And then looking at it through the cannabis lens, which makes it even more complicated with all the additional barriers that are in place there when you talk about capital and the high cost of regulation in a highly regulated field. So we're going to be working on a lot of ideas. There will be some things that we can implement through our social equity program. I think there'll be other ideas that will require administrative rule changes. And then I think there'll be some other ideas that will require some statutory changes. So the report we'll put out will be shared with legislative leaders in the governor's office to look at some of those key ideas that are bubbling up from this group as to how we take that interest and get it turned into licenses, with the ultimate goal of having ownership in this industry be more reflective, at least of the demographics of the state of Michigan. Our latest demographic data, which I just got today, and I didn't look at it that closely yet, but I know in one snapshot in time, 14% of the population in Michigan is Black or African American. Our ownership rate was between 3% and 4%. 0.5% is Hispanic or Latino, and we were less than 1% of ownership that was Hispanic or Latino. You cross-reference that again with conviction data, and that from the Bureau of Justice, I believe it is, at the federal level, 80% of the people who are in federal prison for cannabis-related crimes are Black or Latino, and then 60% in state prisons are Black or Latino. So we certainly have some work to do to get that into a better place. And so we are opening the door to all of those ideas. I'm going to have a permanent standing work group that's going to focus on issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, so that not only can we generate new ideas, but also it can be a good sounding board for us as we're adopting new policies, which is always going to be happening as this evolves, that we can think of it and have a group that can help us focus on considering it through that lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we're not doing things that seem sensible, but ultimately might harm those who have been disadvantaged getting into the industry, staying in the industry, and being successful there.
Another one of the things that will be hot in 2021 will be the Bay Mills Native American group that's going to launch their own independent cannabis industry on tribal lands. I know we've talked about this briefly in the past. That seems to be a successful program that you're not standing in the way of. Can you explain a little bit about how you plan on working with the native groups in order to secure the success of that?
And I've been working with tribal representatives for well over a year now and looking at their interest in the industry. It's been kind of a slow moving process because it is a complicated one. And the tribe's interest in getting into the cannabis space was certainly escalated during the pandemic when they were looking for new opportunities for development. And the administration is supportive of working with tribal nations to figure out solutions. So we have 3 pathways we've pursued, and we have success in one of them already. We have state licensed facilities on tribal lands where the tribe is essentially achieving some benefit from acting as a landlord, so to speak, and taking the role of the municipality there. We have an opportunity for tribes to invest directly in state licensed facilities on non-tribal lands. We don't have any licenses that have been issued in that regard yet, but we figured out a process forward and have engaged with some tribes who want to pursue that. The Bay Mills model, where we have tribally owned and operated facilities on tribal lands, the hurdle to overcome there is how they engage in commerce with state licensed facilities, which ultimately creates a more cohesive environment, opportunity for all involved, and consistency in standards for consumer protection as well, both tribal citizens as well as state citizens. And that's an area where we need a statutory change that gives us the authority to enter into intergovernmental agreements. And that's something, as you know, Rick, we had put into the statutory consolidation effort that's been put on the back burner, but something that we'll approach again in the next legislative session.
May I ask if this now will become sort of the template if you want to work with other tribal groups? What you work out with Bay Mills would then be applicable to other tribal groups?
We've always approached it as a holistic solution, and the tribes obviously have an interest in their individualized approaches, but we want to make sure that we have something that's fair and reasonable that we can apply as best we can to any tribe that expresses an interest in getting into the cannabis space.
I know that there are at least 14 different individual tribal groups in the state of Michigan. Each one of them, just like 14 individual counties, would all have their own different goals, desires, and reasons for such. So customizing each individual arrangement might be advantageous for those particular facilities.
Absolutely, and we just need to make sure, we have a couple of primary concerns. At the top of that list is ensuring that the products are safe, and consumers can't be expected to know these invisible boundaries between state lands and tribal lands. And so if they're going to a retail establishment, we want to have some assurances that the products were produced, with similar controls and process, as well as similar testing standards, so that consumers can be assured that they know what the experience is going to look like, and they can have some assurance that they're safe as well.
Let me also ask, since it's been a year that we've had adult use cannabis in the state and done real well, $440 million, and I believe 73 or 78 million in taxes, somewhere in that ballpark. Over that time, have you seen things you'd like to change, improve, add to? Can you talk a little bit about that?
As it turns out, we got it all right from the beginning. Isn't that amazing? I'll take all the credit for that. No, there's certainly things that we need to consider. I think social equity is the primary issue when I'm asked that question, that we haven't gotten to where we need to be yet. We've recognized some of the barriers that are not the easiest to address. Throwing staff at helping people through an application process doesn't create the capital necessary to run a business. So we need to continue to hammer away at that. I think a lot of the other things that we look at are sort of fine tuning as we move along. The supply side businesses are concerned about testing standards and achieving the right balance in terms of what needs to be done to protect consumer safety, but is an onerous on businesses, and artificially increasing costs is something we need to be cognizant of. And looking at some of the things we've learned from the pandemic. We were pretty restrictive on point of sale transactions, and necessity being the mother of invention. We said, well, you can do curbside service. We don't have a specific prohibition against it, and what else are we going to do? And now that sort of in-person contact, while I think will be restored at some point to a more normal environment, is something that's always going to be on our minds now, right? How many people need to be together? How much contact needs to be made? So one thing we're going to look at in our administrative rules as we move ahead is allowing for drive-through service, allowing for curbside service, but figuring out how we can engage in that and still have the same focus on safety and security that we'd have in-person transactions within a facility, and trying to think ahead to new technologies that might be utilized. I've heard some interesting ideas about consumer authentication and limiting contact. So we want to be on the forefront of allowing businesses to engage in that so that we can do it, again, as safe as possible and in a business-friendly way.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Rick.
Well, from a statistical perspective, it's pretty easy to track medical cannabis sales per person because there's a statewide seed to sale tracking database. Not so easy with the adult use program. Do you have an estimate of the number of Michiganders that have utilized the adult use program? And beyond that, do you have an estimate of the number of total users of cannabis in Michigan, regardless of whether they utilize the MRA system or not?
Not that comes from that system, no. We have estimates in our economic analysis that are more based on population and surveys from anticipated consumers and models from more mature states like Colorado. I think that was the primary source used in our economic analysis. That I think put the number of potential and likely adult use consumers in Michigan at the close to the 4 million mark. You're absolutely right. We don't have good data in the statewide monitoring system that would differentiate, how many times Rick was a purchaser. The data we would look at would make it appear that you could have been a different person every time. I know you have multiple personalities, you probably wear different hats when you.
He's probably one of the big purchasers too. So,
well, we appreciate your contribution to the tax base, Rick. That's always appreciated. So
we're the year-end show, and since I have you here, and I'm not sure when we'll get you back, so let me just ask the question: what's your kind of outlook for 2021? I think we did 440 million in the first 12 months, but for calendar 2021, I know it's a guess, but what do you think?
I've got a pretty good guess, and I don't look at it differentiating between medical and adult use because we're really starting to think of it more as a total market and ensuring that we have a consistency between those two markets. So we're not going to make $1 billion this year. I've been talking a lot that it looked like we might get there, and then people calmed down a little bit at the end of the summer in terms of their purchases, and prices started to come down as well. But I think we'll get well over $1 billion next year. I don't think we'll have any challenge there. I think our month-over-month sales are at about 60 million total now. So that shouldn't be, no, that's just the adult use market. So I think we'll probably get to about 1.2, 1.3 next year, assuming things hold. And an expansion in the number of communities that participate can continue to push that forward as well. Take Detroit, for example. There's certainly consumers of cannabis in Detroit. Some of them are getting delivery into the city. Others might be going out to the suburbs to purchase, but we're going to see an increase in sales there. So I think there are still more consumers who are participating in the market as we see an expansion of offerings. So I think we'll get to about 1.2, 1.3 next year, maybe 1.5. And ultimately, based on the economic analysis, we'll get to 3, and it'll probably be 2 or 3 years before we get there.
I saw a number that said approximately 10% of Michigan cannabis sales come from out-of-state visitors. Would that be accurate, you think?
I don't have good numbers on that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know there's a lot of interest in border communities and businesses to locate there, where otherwise there's not a significant Michigan-based population. So I trust that they've done their economic modeling and they know where their markets are. And we are a border state with a couple of very restrictive states. You look at Wisconsin up in the Upper Peninsula. I know there's not a ton of people on that Wisconsin-Michigan border necessarily, but even more so, those close borders with Indiana, where there's almost no legalized access, and Ohio, which has a medical program, but one that's a little more restrictive than Michigan's. So there's consumer interest in those communities.
Okay. Any final questions for the? Oh, go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah. I think we're all eager to see consumption lounges open. COVID obviously kind of stopped that from happening for 2020, but I'm just curious, there's some changes that I felt needed to be made, and some of those changes have been requested in a lot of the public hearings. But do you forecast any changes happening when it comes to maybe allowing food or having infused beverages hit the market, things like that in the next year?
Yes, and so being responsive to that feedback, we're working on both those things. Our rules now that were promulgated in June actually do allow for food service and designated consumption establishments, presuming the operation has the appropriate licenses. So that's really going to be a challenge for the business: is can they get the local health department to sign off on a food establishment license? I've heard some anecdotal feedback that some counties are willing to do it, others might not be so much. But I think we'll see more as the pandemic comes around. The big feedback we heard in the designated consumption establishment is, how do you make it profitable? I've seen some interesting ideas, and obviously pairing with retail establishments and putting them in close proximity. I've seen other ideas where they partner with a temporary event license holder to hold consistent events at that facility, which would allow for sales then through licensed retailers or micro businesses at that facility. So I think there are some creative ideas, and folks will figure out how to make it work. And even beyond food service, then what was the other piece of that? I had an answer for that one too. Oh, beverages. We're working on beverage standards as well. That's been kind of a challenging one when you consider shelf stability and homogeneity. So ensuring that as you drink a beverage, you get as much THC in the top half as in the bottom half. We're focused on those issues and really taking an individualized approach with operators who want to produce those. And we should have some standards and a process out by the end of this month that will allow processors to create some infused beverages.
Do you think we'll ever get to sort of the Amsterdam model for consumption lounges? I did a fact-finding trip over there a couple of years ago, and it's quite an experience. Do you think we're going to moving in that direction?
Well, I think we're moving in the Michigan direction, right? We want to be a leader as to how things are done, not necessarily recreating models that already exist. I think we can do it better. I think that we've been on the forefront of allowing some of these creative license types with consumption and delivery and temporary events. I'm pretty sure we're still the only state that has temporary event licenses as well. And we had a great deal of interest in those before the pandemic hit. So I think we'll see quite a few of those happening next year as well. We want to be responsive to industry, and where they can present something that we think can be done in a safe way, then we'll be willing to establish the regulatory parameters that allow it to take place.
All right, we're running low on time, and this is the first time on the show, so we're moving into what we call the shameless plug. So
we always encourage folks to visit our website at michigan.gov/MRA. You can sign up for email updates there. So every time we do something new and interesting or hold public meetings, you'll get that direct in your inbox. We also utilize that when we're establishing work groups. If folks are interested in participating, that's the way to make sure you stay in tune with that as well.
All right, Steve, why don't you tell folks how they can get more information about Sensi Park, or how they can try to get one of those letters of intent, or anything you'd like to talk about. Go ahead.
Sure. Any marketing information for Sensi Park and the letter of intent. I'm not sure if I said this earlier, but if we need to get those sent out and requested before December 31st of this year. But if you're looking for that information, please, you can reach me at Steven, STEVAN, .Bratic, BRATIC @Bratic.net. Or you can reach me on my cell phone at 248-842-1480.
Okay, Jamie, why don't you talk one more time about Sensi and your event tonight at 6?
Yeah, so Sensi Connects, we are a marketing and networking and lead referral organization. We host networking events every week in Michigan, and we will be launching multiple states starting in January of 2021. But go ahead and register for tonight's networking event. I did put the link in the chat of this thread, and I hope to see you all there tonight, including you, Director Brisbo.
All right, and Rick?
There was some tepid response there, but yeah.
So he smiled.
Yeah. I'm just little old me. You know, we do the whole advocacy thing at Cannabis Caucus, the Michigan Normal. I'm not really running any businesses at this particular point, and you know that we have Jazz Cabbage Cafe every 4 to 6 on Tuesdays. I do a Medical Mondays podcast also from 9 to 11 on Monday evenings as well. But you can join us for any of those. They're all available on Facebook or YouTube.
And again, we'd like to thank Director Brisbo for joining us today. We hope that he'll be back to join us again next year. Very informative session, and certainly you're welcome to come in anytime you want to broadcast out. We get several thousand listeners, viewers on Facebook.
I appreciate the invitation. Thanks a lot.
Okay, and I'm Mike Brennan. I'm editor of the Michigan Marijuana Report, producer of 420 Post, and all sorts of other things, including Michigan technology news. Keep me real busy. And we want to thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back next Wednesday at 1 o'clock, and hopefully we'll see you all next week.